Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians. We're still in chapter 1. Today we're looking at verses 8 through 11. Now you recall that Paul had been talking to the Corinthians in this opening paragraph about the God of all compassion and comfort. When we have difficulties in our life, God is compassionate. He comforts us. And out of that comfort, we are able to minister to others when they also are going through difficult times. Now, since Paul has mentioned that, he talks a little bit about the difficulty he's been experiencing that surely the Corinthians have heard about, how he has known the comfort of God in his recent troubles. Notice what he says in verses 8 through 11. Now, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles that we experienced in the province of Asia. Now, we were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened, that we might not rely upon ourselves, but upon God, who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we've set our hope that he will continue to deliver us, as you help us by your prayers. Then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gracious favor granted us in answer to the prayers of many. So Paul refers to a very difficult time he had been undergoing recently, for which the Corinthians had been praying for him, and for which he had felt the deliverance of God. He had gone through the trouble by the prayers of other believers. He had been delivered by the compassion, the comfort of God, and now he's sharing that with them to comfort them. Now, I mentioned this occurred in the province of Asia. Now, in New Testament times, the province of Asia is what we today call Turkey. Paul is referring to his time in the great city of Asia, Ephesus. Now, you remember we said in the introduction that Paul had founded the city of Corinth on his second missionary journey. On his third missionary journey, he spent most of his time in Ephesus in Asia, which he's talking about here. It was toward the latter part of that ministry that he wrote this letter. But he had undergone some difficult times in the province of Asia. The harassment, the persecution had been intense. As a matter of fact, he talks about great pressure, that's persecution. He talks about we almost despaired that we would survive it. It seemed for a while that actually his life might be lost in it. He says we felt we had received the sentence of death. All these are indicative of the fact that it was intense pressure, significant persecution, that there was threats made. It was possible Paul might have lost his life. He underwent a difficult time of persecution, of travail, of tribulation. But God had delivered. The God of compassion had delivered him. The Corinthians had played a part in that by praying for him. And in response to your prayers, he said, God has wrought deliverance. You see, he's using his experience of the comfort of God to now comfort the Corinthians. Now you might ask, well, what exactly was this intensity of persecution that occurred in Ephesus? Well, we're not sure about all the details of it, but we do know part of it. In Acts chapter 19, where the book of Acts talks about Paul's third missionary journey and his time in Ephesus, it talks about this time of trouble, this time of persecution. Now, in chapter 19 of Acts, it begins in verse 23 about a disturbance. He said, about this time there arose a great disturbance about the way. Now, the way, of course, is the way of Christ, the way of the Christian. There was a silversmith named Demetrius who made silver shrines of Artemis, and he brought in a lot of business for the craftsmen there. But he called them together along with workers in related trades and said, you know, my friends, that we receive a good income from this business. And you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that gods made by human hands are not gods at all. So there's a danger, not only that our trade will lose its good name, but that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be discredited, and the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. Now you see, in Ephesus, they worshipped Artemis, also called Diana by the Romans. They had a great temple to her worship there. And Demetrius was a silversmith who made little images of Artemis that they sold. But as a result of the preaching of Paul and all the Christian converts, they felt there was a threat to the worship of Artemis. People were no longer worshiping these idols, and their business was threatened. And so as you continue to read through chapter 19, a great riot broke out, and Paul was accused of disturbing the peace, although it was Demetrius disturbing the peace. But Paul was accused of it by robbing credit from Artemis, whom so many of the Ephesians worshipped. Now, this was the beginning of the trouble, but we know that even after this disturbance, after this riot, more persecution followed. So Paul says it was very intense. The gospel had been so effectively proclaimed in Ephesus that those who were converted no longer worshiped idols, of course, and that threatened the business of the area and the province, and there was repercussions. There was persecution. Even Paul's life was threatened. So he talks about these difficult times as they are persecuted for proclaiming the good news of Jesus. But God has delivered us. God has comforted us in his compassion. God has brought us through. And so Paul lets the Corinthians know what God has done in his deliverance, with the promise he will also deliver you. Yes, sometimes we go through troubles, sometimes even persecution, but God delivers his children. God keeps us secure in his grace. He's done so for Paul, and he will do for the Corinthians as well. Hope you join us tomorrow. We'll continue looking at chapter 1 in our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians.